Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you so early in the morning. Welcome to our first session today, but fifth session on the conference. Our session will be about research integrity, and we all know that we have lots of problems nowadays, but also in the last maybe 20 years. We have a kind of crisis in publishing. When we talk about ethics, 20 years ago, we didn't know about predatory journals. We had retractions, but not so much. Today we talk about paper mills and so on. So there are lots of problems, and there is, we can say, a crisis. The things are changing, but the crisis is here. Our first invited speaker is Matt Hodgkinson. Welcome, Matt. Matt is a research integrity manager at the UK Research Integrity Office. He has a BA in biological science and MA in genetics. He worked in open access science journal publishing for 18 years. He was editor at British Medical BMC and PLOS. He's also a council member of the COPE and the treasurer of EASE. And today he will, I hope, answer the question how not to waste a good crisis in publication ethics. Please, Matt, the floor is.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. I thought I'd throw in a bit about the crisis in peer review as well, because it seemed to go together. So yeah, I'm from UK RIO, the UK Research Integrity Office. So there's often confusion. We're not the same as UKRI, which is the funder body in the UK. We came first, they came second. So it's their fault that there's confusion of the acronyms. So we're a small charity that's based in Croydon in South London, and there's 7 of us in the small staff with trustees and a council and advisory community. And we give support to mainly universities within the UK. We produce guidance about good practice and what to do when things go wrong. And we have an inquiry service, so anyone with questions and concerns about research connected to the UK can contact us for free confidential advice. So to start with, a definition of a crisis, so a time of great disagreement, confusion or suffering. I picked the Cambridge definition there. I live in Cambridge. I think probably that's quite apt for the current status of research and publishing. Great suffering. So we've had some crises in kind of science and publishing before, and I thought I'd rattle through some before to kind of quite glibly come up with what the problems were and how they were solved. So how did we get to this situation in the first place? Well, after the Second World War, there was a big technological boom mainly in Western Europe and North America, although globally as well, and the editors of the journals couldn't handle the increased volume, and so what they did is they farmed it out to other experts, so peer reviewers. And so that's how we got the system of peer review that we've got now. We had lots of medical research scandals, especially in the US, after the 1940s onwards, and people came up with the ideas of bioethics and medical ethics. So the Declaration of Helsinki, the idea that you needed medical research to be approved beforehand by medical research boards. So got that one. Demarcation problem, what's science and what's not. Then the science wars in the 90s with the Sokal hoax. What's science, what's philosophy, what's humanities? The solution was nobody cares anymore. The serials crisis in the 90s, libraries couldn't afford the budgets. So what happened? Kind of 2 options. One was open access. So you can either do green open access or gold open access, and then was the idea of big deals. So to reduce the prices, then you bundle them all together and for a discount. Now, we all know that those have created further problems, but that was the solution at the time. And then getting more onto the territory of what I'll be talking about, then clinical trial pharma industry failures in the 90s and early 2000s And there were a lot of scandals with the pharmaceutical industry. People were losing faith in clinical trials. And the solution, especially in the US, was mandatory trial registration and reporting guidelines. And that really did make a massive difference. If you look at reporting of clinical trials from the 90s compared to the late 2000s, it's a complete sea change. And then we've also then got the replication crisis, really started very coming to the fore in psychology, especially in the early 2010s, although obviously there'd been concerns about replication and reproducibility before. And the solution is what everybody here is familiar with, things like open science, meta science, publishing negative results and pre-registration. So this is kind of picking up what the clinical trialists had started to do and then broadening it to other fields. And so this is a figure I'm really fond of, and partly because the journal I used to work for published it, and also partly because it just so clearly shows the distinction between the before and after. So before 2000, when then you needed all of the NIH clinical trials to be registered pre-registered on clinicaltrials.gov, then there was this scatter of positive results. So positive, you can kind of see the positive results down in the bottom left. And then afterwards, on the right-hand side, most of those positive results go away. So there was huge publication bias in clinical trials, and possibly also a bit of kind of p-hacking and harking going on, so hypothesizing after the results are known. And pre-registration in this field, this is cardiovascular medicine, essentially stopped that dead, and it really transformed the field. So where are we now? So we have a crisis in publication ethics. We're seeing that there's all these problems, and we really have a crisis in peer review. So what do we do now? So being in a crisis isn't necessarily a problem. So the don't waste a good crisis, I found, really stems from Alinsky's rules for radicals. And this is, you don't communicate with anybody purely based on rational facts. And it's when people feel concerned or threatened, so we're in a crisis, he says it's a precondition to communication. So we can actually take advantage of the fact that people are being concerned about it, and we can push through what we think is a way to go forward. So this is just a quick recap of what research integrity means. This is a graphic we've got on our website based on the UK Concordat to support research integrity. Concordat is just a fancy word for agreement. And there's honesty, and there's rigor, and there's transparency, and there's respect, and there's accountability. So if we actually did all of those things, then we'd be fine. But the problem is some people aren't honest, and they're not transparent, and they're not rigorous, and they're not respectful, and then they're not accountable. So how do we get there? So what's going wrong? So there's predatory journals that are pretending to run good practice, but really they're just pushing everything through to publication and charging unsuspecting authors the fees, or maybe not so unsuspecting authors sometimes. Paper mills are selling authorship. They're making articles up and getting through peer review. There's peer review manipulation, especially with special issues and guest editors as a weak, a chink in the armor of many publishers, where they end up getting their peer review process subverted. There's large-scale citation manipulations, so that editors and reviewers and journals and authors are manipulating citations. So instead of building the network of science, it's essentially just self-serving. There's problems with dual submission, where people are submitting to lots of different journals at the same time and then taking the one who gives them the easier ride. And then now, very recently, in the last year, really, large language models, the AI models that can produce very convincing text that is extremely difficult to detect. There's detectors that claim to be able to detect it, but really they can't. And unless they leave in one of the telltale signs, like as a large language model I, then it's very difficult. And the problem here is that it's so convincing that it tricks people into thinking that it's real, and it may even have tricked the author who was asking it to write something. They don't realize that it's not really qualified to summarize a scientific field, so they just go, hey, yeah, that sounds good, and throw it in their article. So we've got this massive rise in retractions. So this is as the percentage of science and engineering articles. And this is from Retraction Watch. And so you can see that there's the blip about 2015, but otherwise there's a rise in the percentage of retractions per publication. Now, this is partly a good thing because actually we need to be retracting more articles. And this is what Ivan Oransky and Adam Marcus of Retraction Watch have said. There's, you know, maybe a few thousand retractions. They want 100,000 retractions a year. And it's probably in the right ballpark. It's probably that order of magnitude of retractions that across the publishing industry we actually need because of the systemic problems that we're seeing. We've got a peer review crisis as well. It's extremely difficult to find peer reviewers. I was saying to somebody yesterday, I started out at BMC, Biomed Central, and I can remember sending out one on BMC Bioinformatics. I sent 4 invites and I got 4 agreements. Now, I don't think anybody in the room is going to have had that anytime recently. People are sending out literally hundreds of invites for a single paper. There's an over-reliance on automated tools. Again, with the idea of LLMs, people are trusting them. People are trusting these algorithms that Publons or whoever else are producing, saying, hey, we can match people to papers. Well, they can't do it that well. But the editors are just clicking that button to invite those reviewers. Peer review is also biased. We've seen that it favors the global north. We've seen that it favors prestigious authors and institutions. It's quite slow. And it also seems in many cases to be ineffective. It's not spotting a lot of these problems. It's not spotting even standard kind of errors instead of just people trying to deceive us. So a lot of the problem with the peer review crisis is down to some of the newer big places that are producing research not being able to pull their weight in peer review. So we've got China, we've got India, we've got Iran, which we can see are well below the kind of standard curve of the publications to the amount of reviews that are done. This is from the Clarivate Publons Global State of Peer Review report from 2018. So the numbers are a little out of date, although it's probably quite illustrative. And the key thing here is that it's not their fault. It's because they're not being invited to review. So it means that the rest of the world are getting review fatigue, but they're not able to actually contribute. And very much then, this is the trend from 2013 to 17. It's continued, and the number of agreements to completed reviews is plummeting. So it's becoming increasingly hard to find reviewers. And here's one that somebody shared proudly on a Facebook group I'm in. I think that's Springer Nature, and they'd invited 158 reviewers. And yes, they were relying on the automated tool. This, to me, is just shocking that anyone would do this and think this was good behavior, but they did. So we've got predatory journals, so I won't go into great length. I helped contribute to that definition, and they're prioritizing self-interest, and they're essentially deviating from and being false and misleading. Essentially, they're deceiving people. So there's Think, Check, Submit. So advise people on how to do it. There's a discussion document from COPE, but we haven't really solved the problem there yet. There's paper mills, as I said. So there's this pressure for publishers, for researchers to publish, and it's creating this market for fake papers and for buying authorship. And people are starting to think, hey, could AI be authors? Some people did this in December. They got ChatGPT and they put it as an author. Now, I'm glad that the publishing industry basically has gone, nope, that's not going to happen. So they shouldn't be authors. You shouldn't use them in peer review. You should declare the use, but how on earth do we police that? The risk here is that we can have a load of very convincing fake information submitted, and it's really difficult to spot. There sometimes can be, the references can be misleading, so that can be a way, but it's difficult. So it's yet another way in which things can be subverted. So how can we fix this? So carrot or stick. So Theodore Roosevelt, who was US president, he said, speak softly and carry a big stick, you'll go far. So there's that idea that you can kind of have the threat of things in the background. So with publication ethics, you can reject papers, you can report them to their institutions, you can have expressions of concern and retractions, you can have watch lists and block lists, COPE isn't that keen on block lists, but I found them quite useful when I was at publishers. You can name and shame people. Curious had their wall of shame. You took it down in the end. Or you can have regulation. So we can have peer review sticks. We can have mandatory data sharing, sharing raw images, sharing ethics documentation and protocols, and mandatory reporting guidelines. So really just making everybody do all the things we want them to do instead of making it voluntary. So carrots are great. They're the children's best friend. But sometimes you've got the wrong carrot. So this was an anti-war one from World War I, but I've got impact over the carrot there. So that's the current carrot that's leading people over the cliff. So what are these rotten carrots? So it's really misapplied metrics. So everybody's chasing the impact factor, they're chasing the H-index, they're doing article counting in research assessment, and they're citation counting. And this is incentivizing poor behavior. So can we come up with some new carrots? Payment for peer review is controversial. I wrote a blog post some years ago that was saying that I didn't think it was a good idea. I might be more persuadable now. Recognition for peer review, concrete recognition and research assessment, and concrete recognition for open science practices like data sharing, pre-registration and replication studies. So we don't just write into code saying you've got to do this. We follow up and say, actually, if you don't do this, you're going to be counted against you. And if you do it, then it will be positive. So crisis alone isn't enough. So this is Thomas Kuhn of the Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he's talking about paradigms. So you've got to switch from one worldview to another. And you don't necessarily have to have all the right arguments. It doesn't have to be completely rational. It just needs to be persuasive and have enough of a kind of strength of numbers to bring scientists with you, and you can get that revolution. So we have this old paradigm of competition. Everyone competes for grants, everyone competes in peer review. At conferences, you have this competition to get through. And can we have a new paradigm of collaboration? So can we change the mindset and how people work? So instead of trying to fight against each other so that you bring, you deliberately delay your competitor's paper in peer review so you can get yours out first, it tends towards game playing and cutting corners. So can we collaborate instead? So can we reform research culture and research assessment? So scientific career precarity and perverse incentives are really the root cause of the problems here. So the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, they've brought research culture in explicitly. I think it's about a quarter for universities, so that's an important move. The devil will be in the details, but at least there's the principle there. From longer ago, there's the Declaration on Research Assessment, the San Fran SF DORA. There's the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, or COARA. There's GRASP OS, pushing forward open science, and there's the iNorms Research Evaluation Group. So they can all tell you about what they're doing better than I can, so go ahead and follow the links if you hadn't already. There's also things like the STM Integrity Hub. I've been really pleased with this. The COPE has done some collaboration with this. And the idea is to create tools that all publishers can use, not just people who are part of the STM or part of some kind of special club. So there will be things like paper mill detectors, dual publication, dual submission detectors. That's what I call a killer app. If people can, across publishers, spot when people are submitting to two journals at the same time, it stops that practice dead. So it's that kind of approach across the industry. Collaborating instead of competing can really solve these problems. There's also the idea of this mindset is in Australia in some institutions, they investigate breaches, not misconduct. Assuming misconduct when you're doing an investigation almost prejudges the way the investigation will go, and sometimes using different language and a different mentality going in can get you a better approach out. So it's something we're exploring at UK Rio, is whether this is something that is a kind of good way to go for the UK. And there was a suggestion, it's been suggested before, but this is a recent article from a sociologist, is abolish, revise and resubmit. It's basically saying, stop constantly trying to make authors jump through the hoops to get this perfect paper and say, you've got this paper that, do you want to basically publish as it is, maybe with a few changes, or do you just want to reject it? Rather than this, oh, but if you did this, it would be nicer, it would be stronger, it would be, we could put it on the cover of our magazine, blah, blah, blah. Editors just need to make choices instead of stringing authors along. And it also creates bad incentives. I've seen many cases where reviewers have been asked to make changes, and it was at that point that they faked. They faked a gel or they faked something because they were under time pressure and pressure to produce instead of producing in their own time. It produces poor behavior. There's also, can institutions and journals collaborate better? There's this one from a US working group. COPE is about to produce another guide as well. And it's the idea of institutions and journals collaborating and being trustful with each other instead of this adversarial approach, which often happens. And there's lots of science reform movements. So there's the reproducibility movement, meta-research, digital humanities. So the idea that you can all work together as communities of practice and push science together in different ways. And so not saying, oh, the meta-research people are doing this, we don't like them, but actually seeing what you can do to work together instead of saying, you know, ours is the only one true way to move science forward. So again, on the idea of paradigms, there was this idea of quality. And the problem is that we use proxies. We use the impact factor as a proxy for quality, or we use the fact that it's in Cell, Nature, or Science as a proxy for quality. And we use the fact that somebody's got a named chair as a professor, that, oh, there must be a quality researcher. This is an old way of thinking that really, I think, needs to die, and we need to replace it with a new paradigm, which is transparency. This is the basis of open science, but it's worth just really highlighting that we've got to persuade people that quality is not the thing they want to think about anymore, because it's so meaningless now that showing people what you've done is much better than asserting that what you've done is really good. It's that idea in storytelling of show, don't tell. So how do we reform peer review? Well, there's lots of ideas. We've got preprints, so you just put everything up, and then it's not just hidden behind waiting for peer review. We'll focus on transparent reporting and data sharing rather than focusing on the things that reviewers and editors sometimes focus on, which is, you know, is this quality research, is this interesting and impactful? It's like any fool can tell if something's interesting. That's not what editors and reviewers need to focus on. There's the idea of post-publication review, so that you can have continuing review, community review, so it's not just 2 or 3 people, but a whole group. How you actually get that working effectively is another question. And there's open peer review. I've actually found that I was quite skeptical of double anonymized peer review, but there was a recent randomized trial from a Wiley Ecology journal, and they found that there was really strong evidence that double anonymized peer review gets rid of the bias towards high-income countries. And so it makes much more of a level playing field. What you can do is you can couple double anonymized pre-publication with open peer review afterwards. So you can afterwards tell the authors, the public, who the reviewers were, if they agree, and there seems to be a consensus emerging that if you do open peer review, then make the peer review reports public so people can have scrutiny and learn from the process, but they don't necessarily have to be named because there can be some repercussions for reviewers. So here is Teddy with his big stick, so regulation. If this fails, then people might expect that science and publishing needs to be regulated. So it's something that has happened to other spheres, and UK CORI, who is a new research integrity body, the UK Committee on Research Integrity in the UK, this is one of their things, is to look at whether an additional body is required. UK RIO is not that, UK CORI is not that, but there might be another body in the future that is actually looking at regulating research and research misconduct. COPE has no teeth. COPE knows this, it's not a regulatory body. However, there is a clear need for national or global agencies with regulatory powers. We strongly welcome the formation of such a body. There's beginning to be a feeling that we need this. So people have mentioned UNESCO. It could be something that would go through a UNESCO process. So it's the kind of thing that people need to seriously think about, is if we can't persuade people to do this voluntarily, we might have to come up with a global regulatory mechanism. So there's our contacts at UK RIO. I'll do a plug for Mastodon here. I did this cheekily on Twitter yesterday. We're all talking about open infrastructure, but people are still using Twitter for this conference, and Mastodon is the open and decentralized, cool, trendy, new social media where all the cool kids are, so come join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt, for this inspiring presentation. We have some time for a few questions now. And I also invite our online participants to ask questions in Q&A section.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. This was really wonderful. But I do have a little bit, 2 comments, if I may. One, the biggest study so far that was published 14 days ago on peer review asked, is it time to actually rehabilitate impact factor? Because they actually found that the length of peer review reports and the number of suggestions for methods and the statistics and results are highest in highest impact factor journals. Mm-hmm. So this has been the first study in a very long time that is going back to saying impact factors may indicate some kind of quality of the peer review process. That sort of happens. And the second thing is, while I do very much support the collaboration aspect of, expanding that, it's extremely difficult to hire someone in another country based on the collaboration of if all of your work have been done on collaborations with others. And if my team is better in collaborating, then the other person who grew up in another country had no access to that kind of team and therefore will never get jobs to go abroad. And I was very lucky to go abroad, 3 times so far in my life. But if you were not being judged of what you've done, but only what the team science has done, those decisions would be much harder. So I would appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, a really good point about that study. I saw that. I think it was something that the researchers themselves pointed out, was that there was a confounding factor, which is that the higher impact journals, so as it went through the kind of the deciles, they had far more reviewers from Western Europe and North America, and so more native English speakers. And so there's a definite correlation between the length of reviewer reports and the ability at the fluency at language. And the only strong correlation was in the amount written on the methods, I think. So there may be something in it that the top end are managing to get the cream of the reviewers. I don't know, but it's not necessarily the case that means that high impact is good, because it just means if it's like with selective schools, they go, oh, we got all the best students and we did really well. It's like, well done you found all the clever people, and then it turns out they're clever. So it's not necessarily a great way of doing science. It's just, it kind of can be a self-fulfilling system, rather than saying that's not necessarily evidence that it's the way we want science to be done. With collaboration, absolutely, I take your point. You've got to demonstrate your own abilities. It's like with a PhD, you've got to show that you did your own initial contribution. I think one of the things here that can help is transparency, so that you can actually log what your contributions were. And so ideas like credit, the taxonomy, where in authorship you can say what you did. It's really useful as an editor. I found it great when I actually knew who did what in an article, so that I could go specifically to that person and say, you're the person with the expertise I need, rather than hunting through the author list to try to find who is the actual person with the methodological expertise. So yeah, your points are really valid, but I think it's also about working out how we move away from that idea of we need the kind of the lone genius and the kind of star student, and how we actually move kind of the systems and mentality away from that kind of idea that there are stellar scientists and there are mundane scientists, because it's not really how science works. That answer?
Okay, thank you. We have time for one short question. There are no questions. Okay, then thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
And we will now proceed to our next presentation. 10 years of care guidelines in publishing case reports in pediatrics. Where do we stand? It will be given by Silvije Šegulja, and it's authored by Silvije, Anja Šegulja Perić, Iva Sorta-Bilajac Turina from Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Rijeka.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Firstly, I'm a clinician and a big fan of publishing, so please keep that in mind in the next few slides. 10 years of care guidelines in publishing case reports in pediatrics, and where do we stand? Why this research and why now? The case report as a research design is something very unexpected or novel occurrence is described in detailed report of findings. And that's really important because in last few years, especially during the pandemic, as a clinician, you can only see or get the new information by case reports, because there were a number of entities that were occurring and we actually didn't know how to manage them, and case report is really important. The Equator Network is an international initiative that seeks to improve reliability of value of published health research, and case report, or abbreviation of care guidelines, were in 2013 published by Gainer and LS. This is how it looks. Reporting guidelines, enhancing quality and transparency of health research. If you can choose your reporting guidelines, deciding by study type. And here are also the care guidelines. Why case report? I actually answered that on a slide before, but who can also benefit from quality case reporting? It's patients that usually Google their symptoms, so it's better if they're structured well and they can actually receive good information. Clinicians, researchers, educators, authors, and also medical journals. Just one thing more. So the care guidelines, they really can help reduce risk of bias, increase transparency, and provide early signals of what actually works and under which circumstances when you encounter the new entity. That is really important. The aim of this study was actually to see what 10 years in publishing the world has done to case report publishing. Journals that were included in this study, there were 184 journals, were 71% in SCIE and 29% in ESCI database. So when we actually look at the journals that do publish case report, there are 160 of them. I mean, 87% they do actually publish, and 30% they do not. This is the study protocol. 184 journals in Web of Science regarding pediatrics, and distribution for ESCI or SCIA, it's 71% in SCIA database. So journals that were publishing care guidelines, there were 44, just 27.5 journals, and from that number we actually checked 144 case reports, and this was the methodology. They were all open access, and 10% of case reports in the last 10 years were taken from each journal of these 44 journals. And if there were more than 100 case reports per journal, we took 10 case reports that were analyzed. These are the care guidelines. There are 13 topics, and also there are more items per topic, and the maximum number of points was 13. If one item of topic was not met, the point was actually not assigned. The results were care guidelines in the instructions for authors. Over 44 journals have care in the instruction for authors, and we observed there that higher the quartile, more care guidelines were included in the instructions. When we look at distribution of care points in 144 analyzed case reports, we can see that median is 8, and with standard deviation of 2. Care points according to the ranking. We can also see that in quartile 2 and quartile 3, there are actually more points or more care points were achieved. So we can assume that the journals are striving to better ranking in the future. So this is why they take care guidelines seriously. If we look at some of the topics, title that is really important should include case report in the title, and 69% of them actually have case report in title, and 31% does not. Also, second quartile and third quartile are better in comparison with quartile 1. When we look at the keywords that are also very important, only 30% do have case report included in a guideline, in keywords, that is according to the guidelines, and 87% does not. If we look at the abstract, we can see that 54% do have structured abstract, and 46% does not. And in conclusion, we can see that it's very important to include care guidelines in instruction for authors. It gets better adherence through editing. It should be better adherence through editing process using the care checklist. And we should also acknowledge better results of journal ranked in second and third quartile, also in ESCI, because of the probable efforts to have or to be better in the future ranking. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvije. Okay, we will proceed now, and then we will have time for questions after our 5 presentations. The next speaker is Mario Malički, and his co-author is Bahar Mehmani from Stanford University. Welcome, Mario. Mario will talk about structured peer review, and he will tell us something about pilot results from 23 Elsevier journals.
Sorry. And thank you, Matt, for actually giving a very good introduction of what are the sort of mistakes of peer review. So I won't go into details of that because you covered a lot of that. What I will mention, 2 things, is we have now much more data on peer review that things don't need to be more we think or we don't think, but actually showing what happens. So I know we always say we are inviting more reviewers, but the largest database now released that covers more than 7 million manuscripts and all their review reports actually says that on average across all of the 200 and something Elsevier journals, it is only 6 invites to get the 2 review reports on average. So there may be journals like you've shown of 150, but still we are talking more about it being 6 to get to 2 reviewers that will review. On average, review takes around 3 to 8 hours. These are differences because of disciplines. And yes, it's very true, most of them are unpaid, so maybe the quality isn't best, but that's sort of what we're working in. The other number that we also seen across all journals, acceptance rates is somewhere between 35% to 40%. Now, what we mean by this is the acceptance rate of that journal once it's submitted there. What we also seen from majority of studies that everything gets published, it's just that it goes down the chain. So those journals that have actually followed up on publications that they have rejected have seen that they've all ended up being published somewhere else. So it's rarely that the studies actually don't get published. It's just a matter of question where they get published. So we're not really filtering things for the science. We're filtering it for ourselves and for our journals, but not really for the whole humanity. And the other thing that you haven't mentioned, and I think this is where another big sort of fallacy of peer review comes, is the inter-rater agreement. Again, that largest database has just now been updated, and it shows that in the first round of review, the inter-rater agreement between peer reviewers is 30%. So that means it's less than a flip of a coin. Will two reviewers agree on what should be done with the manuscript? Now, of course, that's when it's calculated based on differences. Did you say the exact same thing? Meaning, if one said minor revision, the other said major revision, they're not in agreement because it's not the same actual thing. We've actually sent a request to the database that they recalculated if we would merge maybe all the revisions together and just, compare accept versus reject versus revise, and maybe that percentage will be higher, but I still don't think it will be more than flip of a coin. And I think what we need to start talking about a bit more, and what was already said in 2010, is why are there so big differences between how we interpret studies? And you could see that in debate that Matt and I had of this recent study on peer review. Should we take that as an argument that if the methods are being more discussed in high impact factor journals, that means that their peer review is a little bit better? And of course, these are natural language studies that have just coming out on a large corpuses, so a lot of human looking things to happen, but I think we're getting there when we need to more transparently talk about what's happening. So I worked with Elsevier for a few years, and I know that we often have conflicting opinions about big publishers and what they do and what they don't do, and especially in promotion to open science or data sharing and things like that. But I do have to acknowledge that this is so far the biggest and the only publisher in the world that has made available peer review reports from closed journals available to researchers, so anyone can apply to access and analyze review reports of all their journals. As small journals and infrastructures still need to be built so that we allow this to researchers and happening. And the other thing that Matt has mentioned is this ratio of how much we review towards how much we publish. Based on the Publons database of 2023, that seems to be on average 0.3 towards 1, meaning that most people publish more studies than they review. So that we have a lack of reviewers is more that maybe we are lazy, or maybe we are not being paid enough, or we have so many things to do that of course we don't want to review for free for many journals, but it seems that we have sufficient workforce. It's only that we are not really utilizing them the best. And we know for us, all of us who work at universities, no one of you has in your contract that is your duty to, or that your university supports you for several hours, that you provide peer review reports for free for journals around the world. If that was maybe specified in our contracts that we could do 3 or 4 or 5 per year, or that is a requirement, we would not be maybe facing this problem that we're lacking peer reviewers. So this study, what happened sort of outside of my domain, we recommended some things to Elsevier to do structured peer review, so not to let reviewers write traditionally whatever they want and however they want it, but instead direct them to answer specific questions to see if we could get that inter-rater agreement a little bit better and to see where the biggest disagreement occurs between reviewers. So in last year, they piloted a set of 9 questions, and I'm sure the questions in a second, to 220 journals. And then we took 10% of these journals and their review reports and analyzed them in this sort of first pilot study. I have to say this is a pilot study and an observational study. This wasn't a randomized controlled trial where we gave one reviewer 9 questions and the other one to do it traditionally and then compare how they did it. This was just an observational, so I can't make causal inferences. And these were the set of questions. The first one is very simple. Is the objective of the study clearly stated? In biomedical research, that means mostly at the end of the introduction, you state what the purpose of the study is. The second question was, are the methods reported in a way that you could think that you could replicate the study completely by yourself? Third question was, are all the statistics reported in a proper way that you could analyze it? Question 4 was, do they need more, like a formatting thing, do they need more tables of figures or restructuring? Question 5 was, were the interpretation of results and conclusions following the data and what they've shown? Question 6 was, have they emphasized the strength of the study, then have they emphasized the limitations of their study? And finally, does any other editing of the manuscript, this section goes here, this section goes down there. And the last question, and the only one which wasn't open-ended, was just a yes or no click. Does the manuscript need language editing? Now, in my journal, personally, we do this before we ask it to reviewers, but these were, other journals, and they wanted opinions from reviewers themselves. So we had 4 main objectives with this pilot. First, to see, will the reviewers be answering these questions? Because people are used to doing things the way it used to before, and this is a burden because now you're asking them to do something differently. Second, we wanted to see what the inter-rater agreement was now that we introduced structured questions, and then we can actually see, well, we asked you about the title, what do both people say about the title? What do both people say about the objectives and things like that? And then we wanted to compare the agreement with the same journals before the implementation of structured peer review. Again, this is observational study, so I can't make very much casual claims. And we wanted to redefine this question to see, which one was causing more difficulties to the reviewers. So this is what we found. The reviewers were actually answering the questions. Almost everyone answered all of the questions. It was only sporadically that someone skipped a question because they were not mandatory in the system. We didn't want to force them. So it was only 12 people out of these 214 that skipped one question out of 9. So they answered all 8. And the second ones, 6 skipped 2 questions. A few directed to attachments, but most actually answered the questions in the fields that they were supposed to do. 68% filled out the comments to author. So after the 9 structured questions, they had a free comment to author sections. What we see here is what we see normally in peer review. They would copy paste the peer review reports that they would normally write. And we analyzed those as well. And we saw that when we looked at those, they answered only on average 4 out of the 9 questions. And so that was our sort of first good thing about the pilot. We saw that if we asked them, they write more in the review reports than they would normally write, because those copy pasted ones are the ones that they write at home, thinking when they submit that that's going to be it. But then we saw that they answered the other questions. When we looked at the agreement was a little bit higher. So when we again calculated it the way it was done from 30% that I presented before, it was 41%, still not as much as I wanted. But when we recalculated it to based on accept, revise, or reject, then it was 60%. When we looked at the journals before implementation of this, that was their percent, 31%, so there was some increase. And when we looked at the individual question, the highest agreement was around the structure and different sections need to be somewhere. And the lowest agreement was again, and we always come to that, between the methods and the interpretation of results. And I think this is where we most work on. So to conclude, we did see that forcing reviewers to answer specific questions makes them answer things that they normally wouldn't. Now, we could presume that maybe they don't write these things because they think they're okay, but having read all of these review reports, I can tell you that it's not like that. We got much more people saying maybe a statistician needs to look at this, maybe at that, which we didn't see before when we looked at the review reports when you don't ask them these questions. We still need to maybe come to agreement as scientists. Why do we disagree on the interpretation of some studies, and who gets to overrule who, and how many people do we need to actually reach a consensus of how to interpret a specific result? And finally, we didn't look how this actually improved the manuscript. So that's in the next stages. We hope to do that as well, to see, do these actual comments that they gave made better improvements than they would have done if the peer review was done in a standard way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. And now we will proceed with our next presentation, the role of scientific journals in times of war. It's authored by a high number of authors. Let me read them. Damir Sapunar, Livia Puljak, Željana Bašić, Danijel Gudelj, Darko Kero, Vicko Tomić, Luka Ursić, Leonarda Gambiroža, Irmanina Orlandić, Marija Šmatkova, Matko Marušić, Ana Marušić. And from the faculty of School of Medicine, University of Split, and Maria is from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Split. And okay, the presentation will be given by Leonarda Gambiroža, Irmanina Orlandić, and Marija Šmatkova. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So first of all, I'm Irma, and these are my colleagues, so Leonarda and Maria. We will talk to you a bit about the role of scientific journals in times of war. So in this time of war, the academic community can still help with ways that they know best by preserving important historical events and documents by means of publication and publishing. A noteworthy example of such acts would be the work that the editors of the Croatian Medical Journal did during the Homeland War here in this area. So there was a great need for publication and publishing during that time. But there were some bumps along the way, and the editors at the CMJ, or Croatian Medical Journal, saw that the problems were not about a lack of expertise or a lack of knowledge in the authors, but more so of a sort of reluctance and a lack of skill in writing for scholarly journals. So they developed a sort of pre-review where they helped authors with all the steps that stood between them and publication. As a result, 2 supplements were published and about 360 articles in those 2 supplements. This paved the way for the directors at Tribe, or a postgraduate doctoral program of translational research in biomedicine, and those at the ST Open Journal, which is now led by the former CMJ editors, to launch a project called Giving Voice, which aims to help those whose voices have been stifled, be it students, refugees, or any other individual who has been affected by the war. So a bit about them. So the Tribe, for more than 10 years now, they have helped their students with protocols, writing statistics, and all of the sort of steps in publication. And now they offer up their expertise to those in the Giving Voice project. And ST Open is an interdisciplinary journal, which means that all scientific fields are welcome in the Giving Voice project. So, but just documenting and important documents and historical events is not the only goal that the Giving Voice project has. Alongside that, there is education of scientists, and hopefully with all of the writing and the publication process, hopefully that will create a group of self-sufficient scientists who will be able to reach a wider audience and shed light on some of the more important topics. And hopefully that will create a sort of chain reaction that will bring about some positive change. That is all that I have to say, and it's really an honor to be a part of this project. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to.
Thank you. So for my part of the presentation, I will be telling you more about the Giving Voice project, which is spearheaded by the aforementioned Croatian Medical Journal leaders. And we believe that it is a great opportunity for getting a complete outlook on the situation in Ukraine, because it allows us who are far removed from the actual happenings to glean an insight into the lives of those who are actually living them and who are facing specific challenges in their day-to-day lives. That is precisely why this project also means so much to the 3 of us as well, because it allowed us as students to be a part of change. It taught us how to stop being passive passersby and how to create something of substance, something that has the potential to be both effective and helpful to researchers and the Ukrainian community alike. The way that was achieved was through experienced mentors who worked on the aforementioned Croatian Medical Journal, who were taught by their experiences and who know the tribulations that come with it, and also who recognize the vast knowledge and the sheer importance that they hold. It also goes to say that they have further honed their craft within the Tribe project. And so it has allowed us to approach this topic from a scientific perspective, and it has taught us this entry-level knowledge of the world of science and how to approach the whole process from the collection to processing and eventually to the presentation of data. It also goes to say that we also have a lot of room for growth and for improvement in this new branch of our educational journey. We also want to further share this message within relating our findings on this work. And we want to let you know that we are open to multidisciplinary collaboration, and we are inviting everybody who has either the will or the means of helping us aiding Ukrainian voices to have their voices heard, especially for those who do not have either the way or the means to do so. The most focal point of this whole project is helping to connect and share Ukrainian citizens' voices to the wider public. And that part of the project is live in action at any given moment in time. The prime example being our chance to meet Maria, to know of her circumstances and her experiences, and to learn how her life has changed in various ways. Some new and some exciting and some already familiar, but that have morphed to change to fit a new environment. And so without further ado, I would like to give her the word now so that you also have, you can also hear what she has to say.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm very excited and thankful to be here in front of you with these two lovely girls. I'm a Ukrainian, and I moved to Croatia about a year ago. Back home, I studied psychology at University of Kyiv. So when I moved here, I decided to continue my studies. So I enrolled into the Split University for a psychology course, where I met amazing people. Some of them you can see on this picture. In the second semester of my studies, I was invited to participate in a Giving Voice project, and I was astonished by the developments and ideas that it had. It warmed my heart that people are interested in helping Ukraine. So I wanted to help the members of the project in the hope that it also can be beneficial for my country as well. So far, I have done some work with editing, but also I get a special opportunity to share my story about journey as an immigrant around Europe. And together with excellent mentors, we are working on the story to perfect the way it can be told. And we plan to publish it in ST Open Journal, which is as mentioned before, international journal which focuses on promoting the works of early career researchers. And we believe that my story and the stories of other people can give us different perspectives of how how victims of war perceive the world. I'm willing to participate in future activities in the project, as Professor has big plans for us. I have a special opportunity to strengthen my skills and abilities, what I'm already doing by studying in front of you and trying not to run away. I can't wait to apply my knowledge from the professors that I get at university, for example, how to conduct an interview or analyze data using RStudio. And I have a great opportunity to see how scientists work and publish their researchers. And every time I see something new, both frightening and exciting, for example, I can see how many emails scientists receives every day and how many cups of coffee are on the table. And when I was writing a story about my journey as an immigrant, I've noticed that I wouldn't remember some parts of it if I wouldn't force my mind to put them on the paper. And scientists say that it is important, well, it is beneficial to write stories about your life experience, especially stressful ones, because people can reconsider those periods and get some meaning out of them. So I think that's also what happened to me when I was sharing my story with others. It was a therapeutic effect for me as well. But the most precious part of this project for me is being a part of a community which tries to help the world. And it's a joy that I get from smart, kind, and open people. And this project gives me hope that we have future, that Ukraine have future, and we will work together for it. So thank you very much for your attention, for hearing our voices, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Dijana Šobota. She's a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Zagreb. And the title of her presentation is Addressing the Challenges in Scholarly Communication, with the subtitle, The Role of Critical Open Access Literacy.
Thank you so much. Good morning to all. I think the presentation we just heard just confirms how great these conferences are, where we are able to hear different perspectives, inspiring conversations. And this is my first PubMed conference, so I'm really looking forward to the debate that we're going to follow after this panel and also throughout the conference. My presentation is going to be somewhat different. It's going to be theoretical, conceptual, and I'm going to try to bring in perspectives from information literacy domain and also pedagogical perspectives and views on these issues. Specifically, I will try to put forward a new construct which I label critical open access literacy construct, arguing that its holistic and transformative and critical approach can be useful in addressing the systemic nature of the challenges that we have in open access as a dimension of scholarly communication. I will also identify a new pedagogical content and also new roles for librarians as avenues for putting this theorizing into practice. So this Jubilee PubMed is, I think, a good opportunity to take stock of open access movement. And I think that this conference and the conversation that we had today actually confirms that we all actually agree that despite some progress, the results have been far from satisfactory, with much research still behind paywalls, and we are certainly behind making the objective of making open access a default dissemination method, while we also, on the other hand, are still waiting to see the impact of Plan S. Sorry. What is more important, I would say, is that this, while the open access emerged as an attempt to give control over scientific production back to scientists and to open sciences up to new voices, that the scholarly discourse actually quite convincingly demonstrates that we are far from achieving this objective. On the contrary, there are many new risks and challenges that have emerged, and Matt's keynote this morning actually painted a very clear picture about the crisis that we have in scholarly communication. So I would not go into details. I would just add that for the purposes of my presentation, particular problems in that regards are threats to equity and inequality that we have in open access adoption, and especially the overrepresentation of the dominant knowledge of dominant authors, and also that these challenges have been not only exacerbated by the radical changes that we have in the overall scholarly information environment, but that also the open access movement itself has been undermined by what has been called uncritical narratives of openness and too much of an emphasis on market-oriented, narrow focus on access alone, while failing to address what has been considered the real underlying structural causes, root causes of the problems in the communication system that we have, and which actually lie in what Matt was also speaking about, in the precarity problem, in the political and economic issues and underlying causes of this crisis. And this narrow approach, market-oriented approach, has also been reflected in the predominant discourse, but also pedagogical interventions that have focused, on the one hand, on the research process alone, and on providing skills and competencies that are considered vital for scholarly communication. So indeed, open access has been considered that it is dependent on scholars and their understanding on the research and on open access and what it enables and how it functions, but it's also dependent on the decisions of scholars whether to publish in open access or whether to transfer copyright. And to facilitate those decisions, to make those choices, of course, scholars need a range of skills and competencies, which on the one hand include basic competencies of finding, evaluating, understanding, and using information ethically and effectively in their academic work. And these have been labeled as information literacy competencies. On the other hand, they need specific skills and knowledge in relation to the research process. For example, managing scientific data, understanding different open access models, understanding metrics policies, alternative metrics, detecting questionable journals and avoiding them. And these fall under the umbrella of what has been termed open access literacy. And of course, those two sets of skills and competencies are vital for scholarly work and communication. But it is argued that if we want to effectively address the challenges that we have, and if we want to enable the full participation in knowledge creation and production, we need to go a bit further and beyond these, I would say, functional approaches, and we need to enable scholars a critical and nuanced understanding of the overall scholarly information environment and the root causes that I have been mentioning that lie in the systemic, that are systemic and political and economical. So this also implies that we need to go beyond focusing only on research process, but we need to go beyond the perimeters of individual research and research process and beyond those silo approaches that treat open access and also information literacy as separate endeavors, but that we need to have more integrative framework which is more critical in nature, which enables emphasis and focus on power and systemic issues. And therefore, in putting forward this new construct, I draw on research on intersections of those two domains of open access and information literacy. And I forward a more holistic, integrative, critical, transformative approach, which is situated at the junction of open access and critical information literacy, informed by critical theory and pedagogy as an approach which is more focused on power, systemic issues, and also on the empowerment of scholars. So in my conceptualization of this construct, I conceive it as a primarily holistic pedagogical approach, which should encompass a range of pedagogical practices and content, which is on the one hand encouraging and empowering scholars to engage in what is called the dialogic problem-posing pedagogical practices, but which should focus content such as the economic, social, legal, technological aspects of the open access, and for example, different economic and financial models that drive open access, and also the underlying ideologies that we have in this system, and the issues of inequitable power relationships and these systemic structural barriers that exist in scholarly production and communication. And also to focus on issues why information is treated as a commodity in this approach. So this kind of understanding of the underlying ideologies and economies of information actually leads us to understanding that scholarly communication is a dialogic, political, and contested process. And such power strategic understanding, which is not purely an understanding in ethical terms, leads us to empower scholars not to remain complicit with the current order, but to challenge it and transform it. And in that respect, it is especially important that scholars also critically self-reflect on their own behavior around information and knowledge production, so as to be able to reclaim their own scholarship. And that means that we need to move also beyond this critical reflectivity, but engage in critical action, so that we become in a way transformative agents of the system. And this is in particular a role for librarians, especially critical librarians, who need to move beyond being only agents and stewards of information content, but also become transformative agents of the system, which has in a way positioned them as powerless, and which has put them on the periphery of knowledge production. And let me finish with a couple of caveats. Of course, this is only an initial preliminary sketch of a construct and of this theory. And what we now need is a clear empirical evidence and practical considerations how to actually create this critical open access environment and how to make genuine process in it. But I hope that this initial theorizing can provide a framework and basis for new research avenues. And finally, of course, I'm not claiming that this construct is a panacea for all the problems, but we need systemic responses and we need coalitions and collective action by a range of stakeholders. But I hope that this approach of empowerment can at least bring us a step closer to meeting this objective. Thank you.
And the last presentation at this session will be given by Dolores Mumelaš and Aliza Martek from the National and University Library in Zagreb. And the title of their talk is Why is Citizen Science Important for Libraries? The experience from the National and University Library in Zagreb.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dolores, and I created this presentation together with my colleague Alisa Martek, who is also here. We're from the National and University Library in Zagreb, where we have been actively involved in creation of citizen science activities for almost 2 years now. And today we will talk about the importance and the benefits of citizen science for libraries, and we will go through our experience. In citizen science activities, there are two main types of participants, and those are non-professionals in some scientific fields, often referred to as citizen scientists, and professionals in some scientific fields. Considerable amount of literature talks about the benefits for the participants of citizen science activities. So we know that the benefits for citizen scientists are, for example, participation in science, research skills, stress relief, enjoyment, and so on. And the benefits for the professionals are, for example, raising public awareness of science, innovative ideas and perspectives, cost and time savings, and so on. But a limited amount of literature addresses the benefits for organizers of citizen science activities, and we know that there are some benefits for us. We review the literature to explore what are the benefits for libraries as organizers of citizen science activities. We had some challenges. If libraries decided to write about their citizen science activity and published it in English, they often talked about the benefits for their participants and for the society itself. Luckily, there are some authors who talked about the benefits for libraries as organizers of citizen science activities. So we created a list of the benefits based on those literature. So the first and most important benefit is that libraries can be recognized as partners in various fields of science because we can give our support and knowledge in themes such as access to research materials, data management, open access advocacy, and so on. Citizen science activities can help us attract new library users and develop new partnerships, both internal and external. And media recognition is also crucial because it helps us in spreading awareness of libraries' role in fostering community collaboration and scientific research. Also, citizen science activities can help libraries to enrich their existing services and collection and make them more visible. It can help us to develop some new library programs. Library staff who is involved in creation of citizen science activities can gain some new skills and competencies such as project coordination, project management, evaluation, research data management, and so on. So after we created this list, we wanted to determine if those benefits can be measured and when should they be measured. And we used our own experience as an example. So I will quickly go through 4 citizen science activities that our library have conducted. The first activity was named Bees Life People, with the goal of creating a thematic collection on the Croatian Web Archive. The second was Self-Help and Well-Being in Online Academic Environment, with the goal of selection and collection of professional and scientific articles. Those 2 activities were created for the purposes of COC project. It's international project led by Liber, where NSK is one of the partners. The third project was Havathon, with the goal of collection of thematic network content in the form of a competition. And our last one was Dendroteca, with the goal of identification of tree species and creation of website. At that time, we only evaluated the benefits for our participants, as most of the libraries do. But now we wanted to reflect and see what were the benefits for our library. So, regarding developing partnerships, for our first activity, we partnered with our 2 internal departments and with 2 external partners. For our second activity, we partnered with 1 internal department of our library and with 2 external partners, which were faculties, 1 in Rijeka and 1 in Zagreb. For our third activity, we partnered with 3 internal departments of our library and with 4 external partners. And for our last activity, we also partnered with 3 internal partners and with 3 external partners. As you can see in this picture, there is an increase in number of partners, and this is all based on our experience. And this is something that should be measured after activity is taken. And we can also take notes on which partners were great and with which partners should maybe we continue developing new citizen science activities in the future. As for the media recognition, our first 2 citizen science activities were not recognized by media, but our third and fourth were. We created our third activity in Karlovac. It is a town near Zagreb, Havathon, and many of their local media was very attracted to our citizen science activity. So they published news on their local portals, local TV stations, local radio stations, and so on. Our last activity, Dendroteca, was recognized by national media. And the news about it was published on our national newspapers, both on their portal and in print. And also the news was on our national television, but unfortunately I do not have recordings here. So this is something that should be also evaluated after activity is taken. And we know which topics are more attractive to media. Also, our citizen science activities helped us to enrich our existing collection and services. Our first and third citizen science activity helped us in creation and publishing of a thematic collection on Croatian Web Archive. And our last activity, Dendroteca, helped us to add notes about tree species on our catalog. And also we developed a web page, there is a video about it, a web page, where readers can see old postcards and newly recreated photograph of Zagreb with each tree species and with encyclopedia notes near to them, so readers can learn more details about exact tree species. As for the personal and professional development, our library staff gained some new skills and competencies, such as project coordination and project management, research data management, developing knowledge about citizen science and about collecting data for Croatian Web Archive, fostering skills in graphic design and web design, writing competition regulations for Havathon, improving social skills in communication and project evaluation. So what do we suggest? We suggest that some of the benefits that I mentioned on the list earlier should be evaluated in the evaluation forms for participants, for both citizen scientists and scientists. And those are those three benefits. We can just add some simple questions in those evaluation forms, such as, do you think that libraries can be partners in scientific research? Yes, no. But a larger amount of benefits should be evaluated by organizers of citizen science activity after activity is taken. And with this evaluation, we can know what were the good parts, what should we maybe take to our future citizen science activities. And also this is something that we can show to our superiors and tell like a proof that those citizen science activities were good, and that we should continue with doing citizen science activities in the future. We are currently working on evaluation form for organizers of citizen science activities, and we hope that it will be done by the end of this month. And to conclude, citizen science can be beneficial for citizen scientists, and also for its organizers, which can also be libraries. It can contribute to the benefits of libraries, and libraries can become recognized as partners in science. As you saw, NSK had some visible benefits, and we recommend to track the benefits through the evaluation of citizen scientists, and the organizational team. And that is all from us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now I invite you to ask questions, if there is some questions for our presenters. Yes.
Well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have a question for our invited speaker, Matt Hodgkinson and Mario Malički, regarding the peer review. We have heard some of the solutions possible, and I'm interested in what would be your recommendation as which way to go in order to get more peer reviewers interested or having time for the process out of all of these proposals. Thank you.
We're squabbling about who can answer it. There's no agreement. What can we do to make reviewers? I think, yeah, I mean, as I said, there's the two real approaches are to incentivize people through recognition of peer review. So it becomes a recognized kind of service thing. So in a similar way that doctors pick up CME points, continuing medical education points, then scientists could pick up, you know, peer review points or whatever. You can have that kind of bureaucratic structure. The idea of kind of professionalizing review, like rewarding it, James Heathers and others have proposed paying for peer review. Now, I've previously looked into whether that was a good idea, and this was a long time ago. I wrote a blog post about it, and some of the objections are essentially you're introducing another possible perverse incentive, so that you can end up encouraging people to review that when they're not qualified, because then they'll get some cash. And you also introduce an incentive of journals to use fewer reviewers because it will cost them more money. And so as an editor, you might be under pressure then, you know, stop having so many reviewers because it's costing us. So you need to reduce the amount. The advantage, of course, is that it pays for, you know, it will increase especially the number of people from lower income countries who can be in review because their, you know, time is money. There's also questions of whether how good a review has to be to get the payment, because I've seen some terrible reviews, and my solution as an editor is I just shrug and I get another reviewer. Do I pay somebody for a shoddy review that just says, hey, this is great, accept. There's all sorts of questions wrapped up in how that would actually practically work. There are some areas where some journals, especially medical journals, already pay for statistical reviewers. So many of the general medical journals do this. PLOS did this for every clinical trial when I was there. So there are, BMC would do it as well. So there's precedence for it. But yeah, I'm not sure what the best approach is.
I think also something that we've experienced is that the biggest studies on motivations of peer reviewers seem to say that we do it because we want to learn from the studies. And we often don't have difficulties getting reviewers for studies that are really new and innovative and something that is exciting and something that the researcher actually wants to be the first in the world to see because it's exciting for them. We have more troubles getting reviewers to review small sample studies and things that already been done in many other different countries, but are now just been applied somewhere else because they don't think that they're learning much from that study. I know personally that there are several developments of machine learning approaches and AI approaches to provide reviews. We'll see how good they are, but I think it's possible we will be using these for studies where the methods have been so many times reused that we don't necessarily need human reviewers to check the reporting guidelines, to check a lot of aspects of things, and we may be saving the workforce for only things that are very different and very new, identifying things that are really, changing things. So I think that's what I experienced in my journal as well. For the times that I need to invite 11 or more people is usually studies that are, you kind of beg someone to do it because anyone could in theory do it. They just don't really want to waste their time because it's not really beneficial for them. And I think that's where we need to acknowledge that a lot of science that is done is not always the most exciting to read or review, even as an editor. So forcing them, I agree with that. It makes incentives very different. There has been the largest study done in finance on the RCT of the Nobel Prize winner versus a student being declared, whose study it was. And this was in finance journals, and finance journals pay their reviews. They pay their reviews $50 no matter where you're from. So if you're from China, you get $50. If you're from Norway, you get $50. And we saw exactly what Matthew is saying is that some of them wrote accept this, some of them just write reject this, and some of them wrote 3,000 words. So there were 530 people who reviewed this same one article, all got paid $50, and the amount of differences in the review reports are very different. So I think those review structures are definitely, tricky. But again, going back to the ratio of how many people review per publish, you publish one paper, but you review 0.3. If in your contracts was that you have to publish one and then review one, or sort of the same amount, we would get again in that negative incentive that you would be reviewing just because you have to, and maybe not doing the best job that you could do. But for researchers, I would say you're not limited anymore to journals. I mean, preprint your stuff. Maybe someone will comment on it, maybe it won't, but it will be out there. It isn't that we really need so much review as we think we do. I think we're still stuck in that mentality that journal publication is the only quality approval. But if we take a few things that we said, that everything ends up being published or it ends up in peer review, then it doesn't really mean that it has been improved by the peer review quality. The studies that I presented here at this conference last year shows that only 10% of actually studies improve during peer review significantly, that the result actually changes. So the peer review doesn't really do a lot for more than 90% of the studies. And I think we need to be more open and transparent about that.
Just, if it's my turn, one comment, this kind of incentivizing peer review and paying for it is in fact already underway with some large publishers who give discounts for peer reviewing, which is a kind of a payment. And I guess that those publishers do not provide researchers insight into their peer reviews. We can somehow perceive the effects, and they are not very good of that practice. So I guess that this kind of positive incentivizing of peer reviewing doesn't always work well, as you said, and that it leads to another problem of how to control the quality of reviewers and who will do that, and it goes into a closed circle. So one thing I wanted to ask something else and I forgot. Sorry. Sorry. Yes, about the inter-reviewer agreement. Besides giving these points, accept, not accept, and so on, did you also look at the agreement in the content of the, because that's sometimes they can agree on the relative, on the general assessment, but then give conflicting, you know, advice on how to revise the paper, and that's even a bigger problem, I guess.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Sorry, I didn't have details to go into all of the classifications, but we saw that they often give smaller, what we call sort of editing or just copy editing advice that we would always jump together, even if they were not the same. So people will always comment a little bit of differently, even when they would say, you know, objective needs changing, and they say yes or, you know, sort of no. But in the end, when you look at what they change, it's like just a word or a typo or something like that, which isn't that a significant change. So we looked at that. There are, they agree on sort of the general, we classified it together when they were going in the same direction, not when they always exactly say the same thing, because these are, I think, smaller differences. It's rarer that they really disagree. The method that you used or the statistical test that you used is completely wrong. It's more that, could you also report a little bit of this? And then we put that as sort of agreement, even though this one said it and this one didn't, but it doesn't really change the overall picture of that section.
So my question is also for Matt and Mario, related to peer review. And it's really interesting when we are discussing peer review crisis and slowness, high costs, inefficiency, biases, and everything what was mentioned in Matt's presentation. We are somehow systematically neglecting that in spite of all possible improvements and all additional questions publisher or journal can ask reviewers, as we saw in Mario's presentation, peer review will still evaluate the level of convincingness presented in the manuscript. So question for two of you is, do you believe that insight in the underlying data could be the default part of the future peer review process?
Yeah, and I definitely think we need to more focus on how we review the code and the data itself. But the problem is that you review the data that you get from them. So one of the recommendations we made a few years ago is, I don't need you to share the data when you publish the article. What we need to store and share the data is at the moment that it's been collected, before it's been touched and cleaned and seen by you. Because if any manipulation happens, it happens on that stage from the time that you collected it to the time that you made it presentable into what your results to be. We are moving towards what we call one-click reproducible manuscripts, where all the data and statistics and the figures can be done by programs based on the data that you have. Where uncertainty lies is that the data you collected is actually the data that you're showing to us. And until universities start making it mandatory for their, and not just universities, institutions as well, there's a lot of private institutions, that you have to store your data in a repository of institutional one or public one before you even see it, before you start cleaning it, then we'll be sure that nothing has been tampered. We've seen in many retraction cases that it takes, no one knows what happened to the data, because, you know, you present what you can show in the paper, and those usually match the results of the study, but we don't know if those were the actual data that was collected. The biggest case is now of Francesca Gino from Harvard University. That's the biggest thing right now in the United States. She's claiming she's not manipulated the data, and some data scientists are saying that she has, and is going to go to this huge trial and lawsuit and everything, just because we don't have that original raw data stored at the time when it was collected. We have the data as it is now, and she believes it in the papers because it exactly matches what she wrote in the papers. But people believe that that was touched, and without actual proof, how do we resolve that question? And I think that's where a lot of this issue lies in that review.
One issue with data review is that often journals and reviewers are not expert in this. And it might be that data repositories who've got expert curators are actually better placed to be assessing raw data than our journals. So, and I think I mean, the general thing is that we've got to rethink, going back to the last question as well, is rethink about what it is that we want from peer review. And if peer review isn't giving us some of the things we want, we have to think of the other ways. Like Mario was saying, can we get AI to be pulling things out? Like there are things like Stat Reviewer that will look at your reporting, and Stat Check, I think it was, that looks at consistency of statistical reporting. So it's the kind of thing that if you can have a validated tool go through data and say, yeah, this variance just looks weird, somebody needs to look into it, then that's the kind of thing that can really help analysis, which the average reviewer might well miss because they're not looking for it.
Well, there are Grammarly and similar things for language checks. I mean, Springer Nature just, I think it was like a few weeks ago, when they've now made a partnership with one of the AI for language checks and made it available across all of their portfolio of journals. So it used to be that for some of these things you had to pay or you had people, but we are getting to more and more machines doing some things that are not methods and data, but there are a lot of things that we end up spending time on reviewing, and that's the structure, and that's following the guidelines, and that's, you know, reporting things or correcting mistakes and commas. And I think a lot of that can be delegated to the machines, and we can maybe focus on the real crucial interpretation.
Okay, thank you. Now we don't have time for more questions, but we have 5 more minutes for our sponsor, Cargo Publishers. So I invite Francesca Brazzarotto to join us and to tell us something about our silver sponsor. And after that, we could continue with our conversation and discussion during the coffee break. Thank you, Francesca.
Hello, everybody. I am Francesca. I am the customer engagement manager for Cargo Publisher. I just wanted to run through a few things about Cargo in the event you haven't heard of them, and hopefully you find some things that are interesting for your institution, and if you're a researcher, some ideas to get your research going. So very quickly, if you're not familiar with Cargo, it's a very small family-owned publishing house based in Switzerland. It's okay. Founded in 1890, and Gabriella Cargo, that you see there, the lovely lady in yellow, in orange, is the chairwoman and 4th generation publisher. As you can see, that's her on Tuesday. She's very hands-on. We talk to her about what's going on in research, what kind of problems researchers face, librarians face, and so she is well aware of what's going on in the market. And we have this kind of relationship across the whole company. So we like to talk about trends and problems that there might be. Very quickly, we cover all disciplines in biomedical and health sciences. I'm not going to say, you know, we have journals, we are publishers, we do have journals, we have over 2,000 ebooks. But what is really important is that we are very embedded in the scientific community, in the medical community. We've been for a long time. And so we support researchers from the very beginning across their whole journey up to when they become doctors, they start practicing, or they remain in academia. How do we do that? We basically support with services and content across the whole research cycle. So this is how we like to see. We start with learning, we go down to read and publish, which are the one you're most familiar with, and then we end with disseminate, which I think is what it's one of the most innovative things that we can discuss today. So the first thing that we figure out talking to a lot of librarians that you are busier and busier. You have to wear multiple caps. You have to be, the people that help doing research, to find the right information, doing reviews and things like that. And at the same time, you're now also having to help with publishing, tell researchers how to find the best resources, where to publish, what is open access, and all sort of things. So you're not only doing your job as a librarian, you're also becoming like a publishing expert. And there's also a lot of educating the researchers in the early, career researchers, especially in how to navigate this kind of landscape. So with Karger, we have a lot of resources in places. We have a lot of courses you can find on our platform, but we put together these 10 very specific courses on how to draft a paper, how to target the right journal, avoid to being rejected, and also something that really takes a long time to explain, maybe how to conduct a systematic review, for example. So this kind of package we call Campus allows you to kind of get your researchers to get a head start on this type of topics, and then eventually they can come for you to ask for, in-depth description of each one of them, and more suggestions maybe. As we heard yesterday and today, ethics, when it comes to the research, it's very important. We are part, we agree to the COPE and the FAIR guidelines, of course. We are part of the SDM group that looks into ethics. We have a dedicated group within Karger takes care of the ethics and research integrity in publication. So we have one specific module on that, and we're doing constant webinars on this and training researchers on how it is important to conduct their research ethically. So these are the modules that are included. And I think, if you want to have more information, just come to me later on the stand and I'll be happy to give you some more information. Now, something that is really important is open access. So as a publisher, of course, we are involved in open access. Who isn't? But because we're so small, we can try to see what works, what is feasible and sustainable for both parties, both the institution, the researcher, and also for us. So we have over a third of our journals are completely open access. We have 2 subscribe to open titles that we are trialing. We started like last year, and they're working very well for us. So there might be more in the future. But also we are helping small, universities or, whoever needs help publishing their own publication. So we do partner publication and we create these diamond kind of titles. But what is also important for us is that it's not just about open access. It's all nice and well when we talk about, not having paywalls and having more visibility for the work and having more citation for your articles, and obviously comply to mandates or guidelines by your institution or your government. But at the end of the day, if something's open access doesn't mean that it's clearly understandable. So what we're doing is translating the research that comes to our journals, and we have packaged them into these fast facts. Fast facts are little booklets that you can find online. They're like this. They are created for clinicians and for the patients. So we translate the research in a way that it's applicable on the field, on the clinical field, in the hospital. And the information is clear, concise, and really up to date with the latest research. And obviously, they're available for your institution to be added to your catalog for free. Basically, how this is achieved is that because these are paid for by pharma company or research organization or things like that, but then they are independently written and reviewed. So there is no, promotion of, this pharmaceutical house or anything like that. So it's clear and independent research ready to be used. So if you have any questions, just come to me later. I can tell you how to add them to your catalog, even tomorrow if you wanted to. And not tomorrow, Saturday, so no. One thing that is very important, and I discussed this with a few of you maybe already, is that open access doesn't make it accessible. So, we hear a lot of, we have to use the, open access because the funding are coming from the taxpayer money. That's fair enough. But if my mom goes to the doctor, she's a tax-paying person, and they tell her, you have this and this and this, she'll just go home on Google and basically find out she's basically already dead. And I'd be like, Mom, you can't use Google. You have to use like, good sources. And it was like, here you go, Karger journal. open access, and she'd be like, okay, I can't even understand the title of the articles. So open access doesn't mean accessibility. The format of articles are not accessible by the common people, by the public. So what we are doing at Karger, we are translating the research into a format that is easily understandable by everybody. We're doing so with videos like animation that are like 1 or 2 minutes long. We're doing that with podcasts. And also we are doing with simple articles that, you know, are easily understandable by everybody. So I think this is one of the coolest initiatives that we've had, and services that we can, you know, discuss with you, with your institution. It can really help display, you know, all the work that you've been doing on your faculty, or all the research that has been, you know, crafted and created at your university, and show also to the funders that, you know, your university and the research of your researchers is compliant. All the main funding agency will put something about the necessity of the research to be shared with the public. You can see here from the European Research Council or the Canadian Institute of Health Research, just 2 examples. It actually says, you know, that you have to share with multiple audience, including the media and the public, or it can be presented via emerging online technologies such as podcasts and webinars and so on. So we want just to achieve that. In this way, you can also make sure the mandates are also, you know, taken care of. In my role as well, I'm taking care of creating these webinars and workshop for your, you know, researchers and for librarians. We have this one on open access on the 20th. Feel free to, you know, come. We will explore more of what's going on in the open access world, and just come to me. I can send you the link. Keep in touch. Come by and say hello. Thank you.
Grazie mille. La presentazione è stata molto interessante e spero di vederci l'anno prossimo. And now I invite you to join us on our coffee break and to continue our discussions. Thank you. And our next session is in half an hour. And please, one more thing, feel free to share your opinion on our social networking sites. Thank you.